I really appreciate everybody showing up tonight. We have, sadly had yet another tragedy, another school shooting, and we thought it would be important to have a place where we could come together and talk about this. Tonight is very purposefully about how do we support our kids and really how do we support each other through this tragedy. There are definitely things that are political about this that I know a lot of people want to discuss, but tonight we're keeping this very much about our kids, specifically how to support them through the emotional piece of it. We have some great panelists here tonight. We have Wendy, who is going to be our meditation guide for the evening, coming from, is it Omaha, Wendy? Is that right? Yes, Omaha. She is with Elevate and Create Retreats. And then we also have Josh Webb, who is a school counselor, a mental health trainer, and a consultant. And we're going to introduce them a little bit more in just a second. One of the things that we really wanted to do tonight was to start out with a meditation, which Wendy is going to guide us through, because this is an emotional thing. This is something that really can get our heart pumping. It creates anger, sadness. And so I thought it would be really good for us to come together with a short meditation, just a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, so that we can decrease our heart rates, kind of come together emotionally, and then we can dive into the more difficult stuff with Josh. So Wendy, welcome, and we really appreciate you coming, with us tonight and lending your support in this and guiding us through this meditation.
You're welcome, Sherry. It's an honor to be here. So I'm happy to start this off with that. Okay, so everybody, we're going to kind of jump right into this. And the best way to do that is just to kind of put your feet flat on the ground or kind of nestle them in however you might be seated. Go ahead and take your hands and just gently put them on your legs or off to the side and just kind of let your body know that it's time to just breathe and be still. So we're just going to go ahead and let our eyes fall closed. And we're going to take a deep breath in. So we're taking a deep breath, filling our lungs, breathing in. And then out. No judgment about how your breath comes in or how it leaves, or if it follows my cues. Just allow yourself to take a deep breath in. And out. And on this breath, we're going to bring our shoulders up to our ears. So bringing in, filling the lungs. Shoulders up to your ears, all the way up, stretch. And then gently like a feather, let your shoulders fall back down, easy and down and relaxed. Keeping our eyes closed and letting our breathing fall back into a natural rhythm. We're going to imagine our heart space energy. And as we're breathing in and out, calm, easy breaths, imagine our heart filling up with love and getting bigger and expanding, and then falling down with our breath, getting smaller, almost pulsating in a slow fashion of breathing in, letting our heart expand, and breathing out. And as we breathe in this time, our heart expands beyond our shoulders, beyond ourself, and then back into our heart, back into our chest, smaller and smaller. And now on this inhale, I want the heart to expand. And when you think of it going beyond your shoulders, think of it going beyond the room you're in, beyond the city you're in, beyond the state you're in, beyond the country you're in, way beyond, expansive as far as your mind and your imagination will allow it to go. And even as you exhale, the expansion of the heart stays and remains. And as you breathe in and out to your own rhythm, feel your heart space fully open and fully expanded. And as we imagine filling that space with love and with kindness And with joy, just imagine how that feels, not only for your body and for your energy and your awareness, but what would happen if we are all doing that at the same time with open kindness and love, not only for ourselves, but for others, for the earth, for the sky, for everything we do, everything we say, everything we hear. All of our awareness falls into this category of open kindness and love. And as we keep our heart energy expanded, we imagine our energy up to the top of our head, down through our brain, our ears, nose, mouth, throat, through that heart channel, straight down, stomach, lower abdomen, sit bones, legs, feet, into the floor. And just imagine that up and down channel with the heart space fully encompassing it and infiltrating it with kindness, with open kindness and love. So now we're going to relax that energy. Go ahead and let that heart energy come back down, becoming more concentrated as it comes back in, closer and closer, country, state, city, room, your chest cavity, and behind your sternum. And just sit with that concentrated love for a moment. And just know that that energy is always inside you, always available, always yours to keep, to feel, to give, to offer, to know. So as we come out of this meditation, just bring your awareness back to your physical body. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and with a peaceful smile, when you're ready, open your eyes.
Thank you, Wendy. That was wonderful. I'm not sure why, but it really hit me emotionally. I think because the love is just what we're missing right now. It's what people need to bring in and spread around. And like you said in the end, we've got this within us. We just have to share it with others. So thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. Really appreciate it. So I hope for all of you that was a good grounding. And I really appreciate you being here tonight to discuss such a profound situation, tragedy. And I know that we as parents want to know how to support our kids through these discussions, through these feelings, as we are collectively processing and healing. We're also individually processing and healing. And so thank you for being part of this discussion. We're going to welcome Josh now onto the screen. He's going to walk us through some ways that we can be supportive. As I mentioned before, he is a school counselor, 9 to 5, that's his job, but also he's a mental health trainer and a consultant. And he was the recovery director after the Marysville shooting, which for many of you, you'll remember because that was more on the local level for us. So Josh, I'm going to start just by asking you if you could give us a little bit more background on how you kind of got into this work and what you've done in this arena.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sherry, for allowing me to be here with you this evening. Thank you, Wendy, too, for starting us off so perfectly. I really appreciate that. I'm very honored to be a part of this evening and sharing with Balance in Mind and speaking with some of your families. I wish my first time with you guys could have been supporting your students in sports or something like that. But thank you for trusting me to present some information to you about this really important topic. I have been in education for quite a while. I've been, next year will be my 19th year in education. I did serve the Marysville School District after their school shooting as their director of counseling. serving as their recovery director for 3 years to help with their recovery process. I've also worked with ESD 189, which serves 35 school districts in Washington State. I've also done a lot of contract work with University of Washington Smart Center, the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement out of Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And I've consulted with over 7 different schools and colleges following a school shooting to help support them. The last being Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. So it is a topic I'm very familiar with, and I hope I can answer some of your questions today and maybe provide a little bit of helpful tips as far as supporting your family and supporting yourself following these type of tragic events that unfortunately becoming much too common. I will say this though, I know this is a heavy topic, but I will say one thing to keep in mind as we go through this is that children are resilient. Children can, receive traumatic events happening to them. They can be exposed to tragedy, but children are very resilient, and recovery is the natural course of events for them. I myself, when I was in 8th grade, I actually experienced a school shooting myself. And so I can say firsthand that it's even through the most tragic events, strength can come from it, and beautiful things can come out of it. And there is hope and there is resiliency for children and the families. So I hope we at least leave with the message of encouragement after this evening.
Yes, Josh, you're bringing a wealth of information and knowledge and clearly experience on this. So thank you for that. You brought up a good thing about asking questions tonight. And I just want to remind everybody, you are more than welcome to ask questions. You can put those in the chat box. You can do it anonymously, or you can post to everyone. That's up to you. You just do the little, at the very bottom, it has a drop down, post and panelists, which would go just to us, or you can do everyone. You can also go to the Q&A box, which is our preference because it keeps all of our questions tidy and we can find them easily. So feel free at any time to pop in questions. We will monitor those and answer them at the right time. So just want to bring that up. All right, Josh, back to you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. You guys taught me a really fancy way to share PowerPoint. So let me see if I can do this really quick here. Sorry, 1 second here. Here we go. Open. All right, this should work. And if it works, oh, here I am. Okay. I can get okay, perfect. So yeah, this is the PowerPoint, and I'm going to go through about 10 bullet points of some really helpful tips that I think you should consider when you want to support your child. And really it starts with the courageous conversation with them, because oftentimes children have a lot of questions about what's taking place, especially when it's just inundated in the news, on social media, everywhere that they're really can go nowadays. It seems like they're just exposed to more and more information about these tragic events. So let me see if I can skip here. Here we go. All right, cool, perfect. Puts me in the perfect spot there. Okay, so these are the 10 items that I'll talk about, and I'll go through them one at a time and give you some more information about it. But I for sure want to be able to answer questions either as we go or save questions for the end, whatever you guys find is most helpful. But the first thing, a big question that parents ask is how do I bring up this conversation with my child? And when I say children, I'm talking about anything K through 12, so age 5 all the way to age 18. These are pretty applicable depending on the individual student. You might adjust some of the information, but when I reference children, I also mean teenagers as well. But I think the most important thing is to begin by asking them what they already understand about the event. It is a misconception that we do have to isolate or bubble wrap our students and to not talk about tragedies. I think it's very important to talk about tragedies with our students. And children and teens are better able to cope with upsetting news when they understand more about the specific event. It also gives you the opportunity to listen to them and look for misunderstandings that they have about the event or frightening rumors, which tend to proliferate online and in social media. So it's helpful for you to be able to listen to something that they might be really concerned about or some misinformation that they have. And that the whole idea about bringing up upsetting news and giving them more facts if they're asking for it. If you kind of think about the way scary movies work, right? Some of the most effective scary movies or the most terrifying scary movies are when you don't necessarily see what's taking place or you don't see what's happening. It's heard about or it's implied, but you don't really see it. And you take scary movies and they go into the prequels and reboots and all these things, and they explain why the killer did this and this and that. It kind of actually takes some of the scariness away, the more facts that are given and the more that they understand about it. But you want to be careful not to overshare. I'll give you some more tips about that as well. Okay, I have to figure out how to, oh, here we go. Okay. The next is avoid misleading them for their own good. A lot of times parents might want to soft sell some of the information, but the amount of details that children will find useful might depend on their own age and developmental level. And parents are really best suited to kind of gauge that and make a gut decision about what's best for this, what information is best for the student to find out. If you end up misleading them, they may not trust what information you share with them in the future, even positive news. So you want to definitely avoid that. And if you soft sell too much, especially with teenagers, they could take that potentially as patronizing for them instead of speaking to them at their maturity level. And I have 2 kids myself, and I know sometimes it's really difficult for me to think about what maturity they might actually be at, but it's important that I'm aware of that so I meet their needs and respond to them in a way that's helpful for them.
Josh, can I ask you for an example on that, the misleading them for their own good?
Yeah, sure. It could be anything from sometimes if it's a really small child, you might not even say that children died, for example. You might say there was a tragedy and somebody came and there was violence, or they or maybe soft selling details about the motive of the event, or how old the children were. I mean, any kind of details you might kind of feel nervous about not providing enough information. But again, it's really important to make sure that if you are sharing information with them, using your own judgment on what your child is able to handle and what they're ready to hear is really important. I'll give you a specific example about how to do that in just a second. The next thing too is to really listen for what they might specifically be worried about. I think that's really helpful for a lot of reasons, because you do want to provide reassurance to the student. And if they're very concerned or very frightened about a particular aspect of the event, you do want to be honest with them. This is another example too, to your question, Sherry, about what's an example. You also want to be honest with them about what type of supports and what protection is available. It's absolutely true to tell them that our government, our police, our schools are all taking steps to prevent this from ever happening again, and for keeping us safe. That information would be true and accurate, but to also be specific about what their individual concern might be. This might also depend on their personal experience. Some students have experienced really horrific events in their past. This week at the school that I work at, I was actually surprised to find that some of the students that needed to talk or needed additional counseling were students that seemed pretty tough. I actually met with a group of my 3 Hispanic students. These guys one of them is like probably the biggest kid in the school, and they seem really tough. But I love them. They're like some of my favorite students. And we were talking about, and when they first said, hey, Mr. Webb, I want to talk about the shooting, I thought maybe they were trying to skip class or they just wanted time out of class. But these 3 students in particular were genuinely impacted by this news. And part of that were experiences that they had as children in very rough streets, very rough neighborhoods in Mexico and in the United. Oh, I think somebody stopped my video. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. But because they've had horrific experiences in the past, this was especially triggering for them. And each of them had specific thoughts that they were very afraid of, that was causing a lot of stress and anxiety for them. I do a lot of counseling and therapy groups for students, or training practitioners in counseling and therapy groups to help students overcome trauma. And one of the first things we do is we try to identify specific thoughts that they're having that is provoking or causing this anxiety. We call them maladaptive thoughts. And what we know from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is you want to focus on the thoughts that's causing the anxiety, because the thoughts lead to their feelings and their feelings lead to their actions or reactions. But you have to trace it back to what are their specific thoughts. So for each three of them, I identified very specific things that they were concerned about and causing them anxiety in a school setting. And I addressed each and every single one of those. So that's why you tailor that information based upon what the student is asking for and what the student is needing. But I didn't soft sell any of it. I told them the facts, accurate. And if I didn't know, I was forthright with that information and told them I either didn't know or I could find out. But I certainly didn't patronize them or mislead them in any way, which is really important. We had a great conversation. They've been doing great ever since we've been talking.
Are there some ideas that you can give us of what some of the kids might be worried about? Because we might think, oh, they're just worried about a school shooting. But as you said, there's other things. I know you can't tell us about their personal experience, how that impacts it, but what are some things that might come up for kids?
Yeah, they each had specific anxiety triggers due to thoughts. So some of them were triggered about the idea of rushing out of the school and what that would look like if they had to evacuate the school. Some had specific questions about what would happen if someone tried to shoot through a window. And another one had specific questions about how a school shooter might access the building, like how they might physically get into the building. So those are the types of questions that they have, specific fears related to specific things. And I was able to talk to them too about other triggers they had. Like one of them was really nervous about driving on a freeway. One of them was really nervous about flying a plane. And I can't remember what the third one was, but they all had other specific things. So we can talk about it in other ways about, if you're nervous about driving on the freeway, what are some things that you can do to help that situation? Well, I can ask the person who's driving to kind of slow down or tell them that I'm nervous, so you can communicate with the driver. So we can also talk about other things that trigger them and then relate that to how school events or being in school in general can trigger them too.
I love that. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, moving along here. You also want to limit the amount of immediate exposure to news at home. So I know we're past, a week at this point. So that's over. But typically when you see these types of things in the news, you do want to limit, at least in the first couple of days, how much exposure they are having to it. And it might be difficult for you. You might want to turn on the news and really get a lot of information. But you don't want to like kick them out and like you're watching the news and they're not. It's better to just kind of turn off the TV, turn off the screens, turn off the phone and have some family time, have some positive bonding connection, positive, healthy family activity, at least for the first night and probably the next day would be really helpful. You can still talk with them about it, but that doesn't mean you have to have the news on 24/7 in your home. There is an exception to that. And I would say if the child is not at home, so for example, this is a good reminder for schools, if there is a tragedy that takes place in your school, in your school district, local, national, whatever is going on, sometimes students are restricted from their phones, and teachers say, put your phones away, there's no phones. I always advise against that, because when students are not at home, it does help them to be on their phones and feel connected to their family or connected to their friends. And yes, there may be misinformation spread. One example from this most recent tragedy is there was a lot of misinformation at the start about that there potentially was a school resource officer who was on the scene when the shooting happened, when that turned out to be fake news. So there was a lot of misconceptions about that. So students in a building with an SRO, for example, might not feel as safe if they were to believe that news right out of the gate, which was not true, which later turned out to not be true. That's why it's good to give a pause for the news and let the facts kind of sort themselves out. Otherwise, you're going to increase rumors and sensationalizing the news, which is really not helpful for the child either.
Well, I would say this is also an opportunity for us to role model, because you're right that we as adults want to get a lot of information, but we can get oversaturated too. And that then trickles down to how we're interacting with our kids. So
That's a great point.
I would say limit the amount of immediate exposure, even for yourself. Be very purposeful of how much you're going to read and watch and all of that.
Yeah. And students and adults, you're right, can have legit trauma from overexposure or different types of vicarious trauma. So it's really important to do that. So great point, Sherry. Thank you. All right, a few more. Focus on the future, avoid the blame game. That's really important. In some ways, when you start blaming other people, like this all happened because of this group of people or that group of people or this societal issue or that societal issue, it does help people feel as if they're regaining control over the situation. And it's very uncomfortable to feel like you're not in control. So blaming tends to help with that. It just doesn't really help in the long term. Instead, I recommend that you together concentrate on what can be done now to help those directly affected and to promote safety, tolerance, and acceptance in our communities, because that's really important. Also, some parents and some schools think about ways to help the cause, to maybe do a fundraiser, to donate to mental health supports or trauma recovery, to write letters and posters and cards and send them to the school. In Marysville, I will say, that we were inundated with posters and cards and all these kinds of things, and that was never enough. Not that we needed more, but it definitely was something where all the schools that would send posters and cards and origami and connected to different things and all these beautiful gestures really made the students and staff feel loved and thought of. So even thinking about doing something like that, that's a positive activity where you're focusing on the future and you're focusing on what you can do rather than just kind of replaying everything in your mind and trying the blame game.
Right. I love this. It's absolutely necessary for our kids. A lot of people are angry about things, and I totally get that. But if that's what we're leading with when we're talking to our kids about this, then they feel like hopeless and helpless. And we want to, like you said, focus on the future. Right now, it's about supporting the people going through this tragedy. And then we can kind of shift our focus on, okay, what are we going to do to change things or to make this different next time? And
yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And turning from inward focus to outward focus and humanity and compassion, resiliency, community, all that stuff is really important. And it kind of goes to the next point, which is expect children, especially teens, to be self-centered.
yeah.
So this is a common event that happens, or common phenomenon that happens, where when you look, and especially, teenagers start to get into existential questions and crises and all these kinds of things. So they kind of think their place in the world is the world hopeless. And that kind of turns to some self-centeredness. But really what that is just a concern for their future, right?
Yeah.
If the world doesn't feel safe, they will start to kind of focus on themselves, their relationships, their friendships, their schoolwork, their sports, their hobbies. And it seems like they're not having this outward compassion that you might want them to have. But keep in mind that it's just something in their brain where they're just kind of like, even subconsciously, focus on themselves because they're afraid for the future. So that's okay. I wouldn't, get on their case too much about that, but expect it, especially the older they are, that will be more prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is what they need most is someone to listen to them, accept their feelings, validate their feelings, and be there for them. Parents really worry about, what do I say? What if I say something wrong? I'm really worried. And they just get so stuck in that feeling of not wanting to do harm. But keep in mind, and this is really important, there is no perfect thing to say. Okay, there's no perfect thing to say. So expect to say something wrong, expect to explain something silly or misrepresent something or whatever, or cause an emotional response in them. That's totally fine. What they really need is kind of like what you mentioned earlier, Sherry, is to provide the invite to talk about it, because it assures them that it's okay to bring it up and to ask questions, and especially to ask for help in the future. If they don't feel that it's safe to talk about it, they won't talk about it. And another thing too is you want to avoid them trying to protect you by not bringing it up. It's okay to be genuine and to show emotions, but you want to make sure to explain, hey, this is a very emotional topic for mommy. This is a very, very emotional topic for daddy, but I absolutely want to talk about it. If you want to talk about it, I want to talk about it. Because kids really want to protect their parents from harm. And if they think that a topic is distressing, they're likely to not bring it up to you. So you want to make sure that even if you are emotional, that's fine. I'm not saying hold back tears, have tears, do whatever you want, but make sure that the invite is there for them to continue to talk to you about the topic.
This middle piece here, accept their feelings. This is such a big piece of it, because every child is going to react differently. Some of them may have no emotion around it because maybe they aren't thinking in the existential realm. Maybe it's like, it's over there. It's a different part of the country. It's not affecting me. And other kids, it will become a lot of anxiety around it, others anger. So you have to accept whatever their feeling is and validate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually met with a student today who explained to me when he was younger, he was not involved in a gang shootout, but he was nearby during a gang shootout. And he was almost struck by a bullet that came next to a garbage can next to him. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like, do you have trauma triggers? Like I start to think about the PTSD index scale. And I'm like, and he's like, he can contextualize. He's a very intelligent young man. So it's the way trauma works is it's not the specific trauma that you're exposed to, rather it's how you interpret what that trauma is. So two students can be exposed to the same exact trauma, but maybe one of them grew up in a rough neighborhood, contextualizes violence, knows how to be safe, and they're going to be fine and resilient. But then the other student is going to really have a hard time recovering from it. So you're right. It really depends on the individual student and multi factors, because previous trauma could make a student stronger. Previous trauma could be a bigger trigger, and it just depends on the individual student.
Right.
Okay, a couple more points. If they do have an emotional reaction, don't assume that it's a bad thing. If they start crying, don't assume that you've done anything wrong. It's great to cry and to process emotions, to even feel like they're having a panic attack, to have stress and anxiety. That is okay. I would avoid distraction as your only coping strategy. Distraction can actually be a really helpful coping strategy, especially if you've given time for the emotion to kind of stew and simmer and process. Then you're like, hey, we're going to go to the grocery store. We're going to make your favorite meal. You're going to help me cook. We're going to have a family night, and you distract. That's fine. But as you guys know, as parents, especially of younger children, my children are young. It's kind of hard to get away from oh, you're sad, here's a cookie. It's like, here's the cookie, I feel better. Here's a video game, although distraction can be helpful at sometimes, if it's your only coping strategy, that would cause concern, and I would try to avoid that. But also, like I mentioned, having an emotional reaction in front of them is totally fine too. It shows them that it's safe to have an emotional reaction. And although we could be having a reaction outwardly in one way, if we convey with our words at least that it's okay, this is helpful for me to cry and to process this, but I still want to talk about it. And if you want to talk, I still want to talk about it too. It's a really important message to convey to students.
Yeah, the one caveat to that I would bring in is that we have to make sure that our emotions aren't so big that they're really scary for our kids. Like, it's good for them to see us have those emotions, but I've talked to a lot of kids that they're like, well, I'm not going to talk to my parents ever again, because when I talked to them, they were uncontrollably sobbing, or they were yelling, or, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think do you agree with that? Or, I mean, like,
yeah.
controlled emotions out loud, maybe?
No, there's an extreme to everything, certainly. But sometimes too, parents might, avoid an emotional response in front of their child, but then go into their room later that night and have an emotional reaction and assume that the child doesn't know that. But children are very perceptive, and sometimes they're aware of what our emotions are. They're awake and we think they're asleep, and there's all these types of things. So I guess the main point is just that It is okay to have an emotional reaction. Yes, what Sherry's saying is absolutely true. There's an extreme to everything, but it's really more important what you're telling them and saying that it's okay. I think this is great. This is how I process through feelings. I hope you feel free to have this, but I certainly hope you know it's okay to talk to me about it. To kind of both, yeah, great point, Sherry. Yeah, absolutely.
There's
And
one
then
other thing, Josh, before you move on, that you mentioned here, and it's about like having them move on, right? Like to the coping skill of distraction, which I think is great, as you point out, in some situations, kind of after they've had some time with that emotion, versus like if they start crying, like, oh, don't cry, it's gonna be okay, everything's fine.
yeah,
You know,
here's a
let's do
cookie.
this. Yeah, here's a cookie. Like, wait and give the cookie after they've been able to process and be in that emotion for a bit. So the message you're telling them is not, don't have emotions, don't do this.
Yeah.
Like, let's
Yeah,
do this.
or even better, make it a mindfulness experience where it's like, let's look through a recipe book and find a really cool cookie recipe one. Okay, we got that. Now we're going to make a list of ingredients. We're going to see how much it's going to, we're going to go to the store. We're going to buy the ingredients, and you're being mindful the whole time of what you're purchasing. And then you bake the cookies together and you give some to your neighbors. You know, like that's a better distraction because it's positive and proactive, that kind of thing. Yeah, great point. Okay, last point here is don't feel ashamed to seek help. Parents worry all the time, like, oh, I need to get therapeutic help for my kid and I failed as a parent. No, you're failing as a parent if your kid needs therapeutic help and you won't get them therapeutic help. Then you failed. But it's not bad to seek help or to seek family counseling. And honestly, your school is really well equipped. You have an amazing student services director in your district who does amazing work with SEL and psychological needs and counseling needs for students. So a lot of times going to your school's counselor, which I'm biased, I'm a school counselor, or your school psychologist, or your some type of a support role in your school is a great place to go. And especially because a lot of these tragedies are really impacted at school, it's helpful for your school staff to know there are students that are impacted with this type of anxiety and trauma. I wish more parents would reach out to me as a school counselor to let me know which of my students are impacted by anxiety related to this, because I could really help them. So don't feel ashamed to let your school know that your child could benefit. They're usually the best first stop to go to. Last thing I want to show is just some future resources to take a look at if you're interested. National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. Their accolades are outstanding. They've been serving schools around these topics since 9/11. They were actually, the director was the main recovery director for New York Public Schools after 9/11, and ever since then, just their stuff is outstanding. A lot of the talking points I got for today was from them. National Association of School Psychologists has amazing prevention intervention work with students in schools, and they have a ton of resources that are really helpful for families and schools alike. SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a great publication about talking to youth after traumatic events. And then the Center for Resiliency, Hope, and Wellness in Schools is also a great resource that does a lot of the therapeutic work that I was mentioning for group therapy in schools, such as Bounce Back is a big one, and CBITS is another one, which actually your district has implemented. So way to go, Lake Washington, for sure. But yeah, I guess that's the end of my presentation. I'd love to answer questions and kind of respond to what your guys' needs might be.
Great, sounds good. So I would invite anyone who has questions to either put it in the Q&A or put it in the chat box. The other thing I'd love to see in the chat box is what's kind of standing out for you that you feel like, okay, this is something I can hold on to and use or implement. When we share that, then we kind of remind ourselves of that. So if you can pop those in the chat box. Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's ask Johnny if you're willing to come on screen for a bit. Let's have you, Josh, there you go, and share your screen. Johnny, you can come on and tell us a little bit about our district specifically, like what can parents expect as far as support around this? Because Josh mentioned go to your counselors. Where's kind of the first place they should head to get support?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces that kind of happen simultaneously. There's obviously what the home support is, and ideally as a parent or if you have older siblings, there's what is the support network at home. In terms of the school piece, I always go to two places, our great counselors that we have, and then in addition to a trusted adult. So Your child might have a trusted adult that they feel like they can have any conversation with. That's where I would lean and ask your child, like, who's an adult that you trust today that you can talk? And I apologize, you're probably hearing Legos in the background. My daughter is here with me. I think it's important for her to be a part of conversations like this. And as she can hear in the background. I just want to, I just want to mention and say that, the adults in the building are also equipped to have these awkward conversations. We will fumble through it as well. We are not perfect at these conversations. I fumble with it. I have a 6-year-old that I fumble with conversations all the time. But the important piece, like Josh had said, is the invitation. And sometimes it's the initiated by the adult, and sometimes for our students to initiate so that we know that there's an opportunity to talk about that. And then we also have, as Chrissy put it, at our middle school and high school level, we have also our mental health specialists, which is through YES and Evergreen Health. And they're also an amazing source of resources and the opportunity to meet with students as well. So we have, I would say, a pretty good support system. And we hope that students feel like they can access that. And they don't, a trusted adult can either hand them off or have that conversation.
The bottom line is we've got resources in the district. And if anybody's joining us, it's not in Lake Washington School District, you reach out to the counselors in your district. And if they don't have the resources to help you out, they will certainly help to get you to the right resources. For sure. Okay, Josh, we have a question. And sadly, I haven't seen this yet, but there's apparently another shooting that's happened. I'm not sure if that is in a school or not, but the question is, it's not, okay. How does one pace the bad news that keeps coming without losing our minds? And likewise, without our kids, like just being bombarded by this.
Yeah, that's a good question. It can seem like it's constant, and the news, certainly wants to have people watch the news. So we have to be mindful of that. That they want people to tune in and to watch things. So they will, tend to sensationalize things. I don't know that much information. I think this is an event or this is a perfect example of, I'm probably not going to read too much about it until later. It was at a hospital. So I imagine, and it looked like there was, obviously armed security right away at the scene. And so I don't even know much more about that other than I was reading the news before I came on. So this is something where I would definitely take a pause on social media and reading about this event. The new episode of Obi-Wan came out today. I got to watch that when I get home. Like, I'm not going to focus on this for right now. I'm going to take some self-care time and just be mindful of what I can take and deal with. And I will say too, like, we do underestimate how impacted the adults are. I prepared a message to read to students the day after the shooting for teachers, and the students actually handled it very well, but the adults really had a hard time reading the message. We should have had an emergency staff meeting to talk about that initially with the teachers, but we were just SBA testing. So, it was a crazy schedule. But I think it's really important that we keep very mindful of ourselves and us as adults, that we can be really directly impacted and know what's too much for us. Great question.
Yeah.
And Josh, to that point, I just want to add on top is really, how are you protecting your energy? And what do you want to gear your energy towards? And I would always say, through tragic events like this, we can spend large amounts of energies essentially ruminating about it. And to Josh's point, is like, we know about the incident. How much time do we need between the actual incident and then kind of turning on to see what is the actual news as they have more information? Breaking news is really hard because it's like breaking news and there's not enough news, right? And so just be mindful of how much energy you're willing to put towards that, and how much time are you willing to ruminate versus, hey, I'm going to protect my energy today to really love on my children. And then when they go down, maybe I'll turn on the TV and listen to it for about 10 minutes, because we know every 10 minutes they're kind of replaying the same thing, right? Or they have someone coming in to talk about it from a particular perspective. So really protect your energy in terms of how much time you want to dedicate to it.
That'd be very purposeful. I like that. Yeah, I'll give you an example. In my home, my husband likes data, right? And we went through this with COVID, like every day he's looking at the data, you know, and all of that. And I was like, okay, I want to stay on top of things, but I'm not going to talk about this all day long. And it's the same thing with this. He was coming at me with all the data that was coming out in the news about the shooting. I was like, right now, I'm not in the space to do it. I'm about to see clients, but I will check in with you later and we can talk about this. So even with your spouse or your kids, you still have to kind of monitor, even friends, how much time are you going to co-ruminate about this?
Yeah, and yeah, that word you guys brought up, ruminate, that's really important. Sometimes it's difficult for us to realize that we're ruminating on something. So you know, we talk about this with mental health therapists, but it's sometimes parents function as the first line of mental health therapy for your kids. And it's really important to decide now who your go-to person is. So if I'm really stressed out and I'm having a hard time, you know, maybe Johnny, you know, Johnny's my friend. Maybe Johnny's the guy that I know that if I need to call somebody, I can call Johnny. So who's your Johnny? Who's the person in your life that you can call when you feel it's too much and you need to process it as well? It's important to decide that now before you need it. So you already know who to call, because it's very difficult to decide that if you're really impacted.
Right, so true. While we're waiting for any more questions to come in, I would love to hear in the chat box, like, who has already had a conversation with their kids about that? And also, like, what age are they? So have you talked to your 13-year-old about it? Have you talked to your 6-year-old about it? That would be really interesting for us to kind of share with each other, so that we know. And we're all in this together. As you know, everyone is saying tonight, there's no perfect thing to say. There's no exact template of how to have this conversation. It's that dance that Josh mentioned, that back and forth of, you know, being able to connect with your kids and understand how much they need or how much they don't need in that moment, and just really be there for them is the most important thing. Okay, let's see. Okay, what about, someone's asking, what about private behavioral health support, a place where you're able to see always the same person? Oh yeah, so someone's saying, like, right now in the therapy world that we're in, a lot of therapists change. So they might start seeing someone and then all of a sudden, you know, the therapist changed on them, which creates, you know, you have to start this new relationship over. How can they navigate that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because in a lot of community health resources, which a lot of low-income families have to access first due to their insurance, they have like students who are still finishing up grad school or just out of grad school. So they're getting their hours. So they'll work with the therapist for like 6 months, and the therapist will get licensed and start their own practice. And then you have to start all over. So it really impacts our lowest income families the most. So that is difficult. Well, what I would say is that the helpful thing about mental health therapy nowadays is that they're all trained in different modalities of therapy, and it should be focused on the therapeutic intervention less than the person that's doing it. They should be providing an evidence-based therapeutic approach. So for example, if it's trauma focused, maybe they're doing TFCBT, trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a pretty standard go-to one for people experiencing trauma. But as long as you're meeting a therapist who's trained in that, then it's the counseling resource in theory that's the resource, not necessarily the specific person you're seeing. Great question.
I like that, yeah. So if you have to change, try to get someone who's coming at it from the same modality.
Yep, and that your therapist, you sign a release of information for your previous therapist to talk with your new therapist.
So it's not starting from scratch. I like
Totally.
that. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we have just a couple more minutes. Josh, is there anything else that you feel like we should cover before we kind of sign off for the night?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you guys know that, you know, a lot of times when all this news comes out, there's the misconception that schools are not safe. And that's just not true. I mean, a majority of the violence that happens in our country is not happening in schools. It's happening out in the communities. And we look at school shootings because they are especially scary and sensationalized, but schools do a great job of preventing violence and preventing these things. And we never see those. We know that doesn't make the news. When a school does a threat assessment, they successfully identify someone who needs help and we intervene and stop something, that doesn't make the news. So schools are safe. The other thing that schools do really well, which from some of the information I've gotten from this recent one, is having a really a really concrete safety plan and protocol for lockdowns for your schools, which I know exist in Lake Washington for sure. But lockdowns, when schools go into lockdowns instantly, and when they go into lockdowns immediately, that is the safest way to protect children, to get the doors locked, to lock everything. And there is no example as anything that I've ever seen of an example of a school shooter making it through a locked door. They may shoot through the locked door, but they're not going to gain entry. So it's really important for students to know that they are safe at school. And the best things that schools can do, in addition to mental health resources, is really practicing, really honing in those lockdown drills. And then the other thing too, because people do bring up a lot of things about preventing school violence, like what is the characteristic of a school shooter or someone who would, you know, come and commit violence. The one thing they all have in common, because there's a lot of conspiracy theories about that, but the one thing they absolutely all have in common is that they're depressed and they're suicidal. So to the extent that you have awesome districts like Lake Washington who are screening for kids who are depressed, screening for kids who are suicidal, and preventing mental health interventions, that's the best way to keep schools safe. Those two, a combination of those two things.
I love that. Which makes me also think that if we know that there is a kid who's struggling, that we can't just stand by idly. We need to somehow intervene, whether it's talking to the school counselor or, you know, just getting support for that child, even if we don't really know them. If your child says, hey, so-and-so said this on social media, don't take that lightly. I know a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to get them in trouble, so I don't want to say anything, but you're helping them. You're not getting them into trouble. Like if you don't intervene and something tragic like this happens, you haven't helped anyone. So
absolutely. Yeah, because kids, adults that are suicidal, and depending on their complex array of mental health needs, that suicidality turns into homicidality, and that's where you get these types of events taking place. So you're right, it's very important to provide those early interventions. And what you said is perfect, Sherry, because like the curriculum we use in our district for suicide prevention, not only do we screen students, but we teach students that they have to say something if one of their friends is talking about being suicidal. A lot of times with youth, it's code of silence, right? If you tell an adult, you're snitching on them, you're narking on them. The illustration I use with kids is I say, you know, what if way in the future you go to a party and one of your friends has too much to drink and they're going to drive home? If you took their keys from them and threw them in the bushes, is that okay? Are you a bad friend because you did that? Well, like, no, I guess not. You know, no, because that person's not in their right mind. They don't have the judgment to decide to drive a car. They're not in control. So you have to take that away from them, and you have to tell somebody. And they might be initially upset that you said something, but in the long term, once they get help and treatment, they're going to come around and they're going to thank you for telling. So it's very important to communicate that message to kids that see something, say something. If one of your friends is suicidal and talking about depression, you have to tell an adult, and keeping the secret is not helpful for them. And you're only a good friend if you tell a trusted adult.
If you walk away from tonight with nothing else but that message, talk to your kids about, you have to say something if someone you know is suicidal. You're exactly right. Teens are afraid to say anything because they don't want to jeopardize that friendship. And what I say also is, you know what, if they are never your friend again, wasn't it worth it to save their life? You know, it definitely is. So one last thing I want to mention, because you brought this up, how important it is to do these drills. And I know that there has been some talk about, but wait, are we causing anxiety by having these safety drills in the schools? So talk to us about that.
No, absolutely not. It actually helps, because what you learn, there might be initial anxiety, like if you're part of a school where they never do lockdown drills, once you start it, that might provoke anxiety at the start. But from personal experience, actually the first school district I ever worked in was the Everett School District, and I was a campus security officer at an alternative high school. So I was in charge of all the drills. I drilled lockdowns, fire drills, and earthquake drills once a month. And I did them all on the same day. And it's also very important during the drills to communicate the difference between a fire drill. So if you're in a lockdown, you don't exit if the fire alarm's pulled. That's bad. So it's a good way to talk about that. But it's the regular repetitive that's almost exposure therapy for a kiddo, because you want it to be second nature. You want it to be, oh, lockdown drill. Okay, all right, close the windows, blah, 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 blah. That's how you reduce anxiety, is exposure. if you don't do that, then if you ever are in a lot, because sometimes we get thrown into lockdown drills for very benign reasons, right? There's been robberies like 4 blocks away, or whatever, from a convenience store, and we have to go into lockdown. So you don't want that to traumatize kids. You want any excuse you can to go into lockdown, that's fine. And the more exposure helps the students.
I like that. Yeah. We've had one at our local middle school because there was a bear on the playground. So you never know what it is,
That's
right?
a great reason to do a lockdown.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I like that. So we need to think of this in terms of, we're educating them about it. We're making sure they're safe if anything were to happen. And we're decreasing the anxiety by explaining what this is. Just like with an earthquake drill, we don't stop doing those because we don't want to have our kids anxious about earthquakes. We need them to be prepared. And the more prepared, probably the less anxious.
Yeah, it has to be autopilot. Oh, lockdown, they should be so familiar with the lockdown drill. If they have a substitute teacher, they'll help their sub. Like, oh, you do this, you do that. Yeah, put that there. Okay, good. Yeah. Like that's what you want.
That's great. That's great. Because I know I think there was a petition going around our district at some point, like, we need to stop these drills because we're causing anxiety. So I really appreciate your insight into that.
There is a little bit more of a debate about a specific drill called the Alice drill, where you do teach students to fight somebody that comes into the classroom, and to the extent that you drill that, whether or not that's helpful. And that is a debate. I don't want to say I'm not extremely opposed to it, but I would say it's the lockdown that's the most helpful, and I would focus on that. And the other stuff, I think it kind of gets lost in translation. So I don't know that I would focus on that as much, but if you do have a district that does, that's okay. But I'd focus more on the lockdown, locking every door in the building, going to that, and having some type of communication with the office and a incident command response team, essentially, that you set up in your school.
So the very, very basic, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Somebody here is saying my kid found the Alice drill traumatic. I believe they can drop out if they want to. Yeah. Yeah. And so maybe part of that is, if they are doing the Alice, to kind of give a little more explanation, or maybe have time to process afterwards, or something along those lines. Johnny, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm coming on in terms of Alice training. I'll take some of this back and ask our safety department, and I can have something back to you guys. And we definitely do know that the debate is out there, and something that we're looking into. And again, to Josh's point, is like, what are the foundational pieces to keep ourselves safe, and what does maintaining safety look like? And then in terms of the other trainings, those are things that we are definitely looking into to see, are there adverse impact? And we don't want to create inadvertent adverse impact, but we also want to help our students identify and know what are those tiers of safety, right? Like low level safety of hey, I just need to be aware of my surroundings, versus hey, I need to be quiet because X, Y, and Z. And we want to make sure that the students are developing their own sense of okay, this is a situation where it is really thinking about safety. I need to make sure that I'm protecting myself and others, in terms of, that's why we're having the doors locked down, versus other types of situations like a bear, something that we see quite a bit this spring. I don't know what it is, but we're seeing quite a bit of black bears around here.
Right, exactly. All right. Awesome.
And to Johnny's point, I'll say this is, a lot of it is intuitive. Kids will know, I'm in a situation where I need to fight, or typically this is the protocol, but I probably need to jump out the window and do this. If we drill too much about these specifics, all that becomes lost, and it takes away internal intuition of teachers and students. So definitely practice locking the doors and lockdown. Everything that it's a good debate to have, and it's important. One more thing too, I'll say, because this kind of came up in the Texas thing, is that there is specific credentials that police officers can have in active shooter training, AST training. So I think it's also important, and I know Washington State is very prolific, to make sure that our police and first response are trained in AST and certified in that, because there are specific ways to handle that, and to really build that bridge and that communication with law enforcement. It will only help you feel safe and feel more connected to your local first responders.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I mean, this was very insightful and very helpful, and I hope for those of you who are in attendance tonight feel like you have a better grasp on how to talk to your kids about this, how to support them. It is so important that we're there for them. And as Josh pointed out, to start, ask them if they want to talk about this, ask them what they know, especially for those who have kids who are on social media. They are getting stuff every single day about this. So you want to make sure with those kids, especially, that you're having this conversation so you can help to alleviate their fears. That's so key. Right, thank you so much, Josh and Johnny, Wendy, for being on the panel tonight. We put this together in just a couple of days, so I really appreciate you doing this presentation, and you just brought some calm to our community, so thank you for that. Right, good night, everyone. If you want to leave a message on your way out in the chat box, just let us know. Say thanks to Josh or Johnny, and just let us know what you're taking away from this tonight. That's always helpful for us to know, and we can help to spread the word so other parents will be able to watch this. We'll be popping it into the Facebook group at some point. We'll have the recording available. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.